Hey folks, this week we're talking about the new KDE immutable distro that looks to be coming. We're talking about what might be Ken's next laptop. Then there's the Kernel 6.12, 6.13 merge window opening. We're talking about Fedora and the new KDE edition that's not just a spin. Oh, and then don't forget .NET, the next version of Debian. Lots of good stuff. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 178, recorded Saturday, November 16th. I'm interested in cash. Hey folks, it is Saturday, and you know what that means. It's time to get geeky with Linux and open source and all kinds of fun stuff. It's the Untitled Linux Show. We're going to have a lot of fun today. I think it's time for a kernel refresh as 6.12 is out, and there's some gaming stuff going on. It's going to be a lot of fun, and of course, it's not just me. We've got the regular crew here, and we are going to start with some KDE news, and this reminds me of something that I've been saying for a long time, that one of the worst things about KDE Neon is Ubuntu. Rob, they finally listened, didn't they?
Absolutely. That
hurts a little.
kind of part of what I was going to get at here is, but also, again, I take a day off and these guys came close to hitting all the big stories last week. But because this is a little bit of an old story now, you got real close. But when you talked about Ubuntu Core and the Register article mentioning KDE Academy 2024, this is something else that was also announced there. And to be fair, this actually came out right before the last show that I was here on, so I kind of missed it too. So better late than never. Exciting news about KDE working on their own bulletproof KDE Linux distro. So when I say bulletproof, this is a reference to its immutability, similar to Ubuntu Core's design, which references back to the story that they talked about last week. But unlike Ubuntu Core, KDE Linux, it's going to obviously feature KDE Plasma rather than GNOME. But then also KDE Linux, which is currently codename Project Banana, is a new KDE initiative separate from the KDE Neon, and it's aiming to bring a seamless, user-friendly experience that merges KDE software's reliability and rich interface with the cutting-edge Linux technologies. And yes, as Jonathan has long explained, the problems with KDE Neon, their current flagship KDE distro, and basing its distro on Ubuntu, trying to have the bleeding edge version of KDE Plasma running on top of the relatively antiquated Ubuntu base, at least, a bit behind the more bleeding edge distros. Go ahead.
It was Ubuntu LTS, right? It's not just that it was Ubuntu, but it was Ubuntu LTS.
LTS.
So they would be running like a year-old kernel in some cases, and some of the stuff KDE is doing is really pushing the limit on what the kernel can do. And so there were times that I would try to boot into KDE Neon, and it would just be broken, like badly broken. Stuff would not come up at all. And it's because KDE was trying to do all of its fancy stuff, and the old kernel just didn't have support for it. So it was not just a slam on Ubuntu, Jeff.
LTS.
But I'll have a story later that's going to touch on something that might change that a little bit too.
But also, much like how SteamOS decided to rebase on Arch to keep up with the latest technologies, KDE Linux will also be rebasing on Arch. The immutable system will utilize Btrfs for its image-based snapshots, making rollbacks simple, and will utilize the newer System D boot that we've talked about in the past, briefly at least, with custom theming rather than using Grub. The Btrfs architecture will include an image-based A/B update mechanism, kind of like what Android uses, with rollback capabilities and a recovery partition for added resilience. Users can benefit from the automatic backup system using Btrfs snapshots, which includes a user-friendly GUI similar to Apple's time shift is what the article referenced. I like to think it also more like Linux Mint's or Apple's time machine. Sorry. I like to think of it like Linux Mint's time shift. All immutable data, such as user home directories, cache locations, is encrypted for enhanced security. With most immutable desktops, you need a containerized method to deploy applications. And so KDE Linux will utilize Flatpaks and maybe snaps, but you have to try to get away from Ubuntu. Get away from snaps too. I don't know. But even though there's going to be a stable version, it's still going to be rather bleeding edge. It's still Arch, but these techniques will make, even though they're going to make a very safe, stable way to run Arch. Stable meaning runs well, not necessarily code isn't changing. There is a reason the likes of Valve have also picked Arch for their base. The goals they have for this distro are to be the KDE operating system, user-friendly, high-quality user experience, doesn't break or at least easy to recover, keeping security in mind, no packaging knowledge needed to develop for it, and focus on modern technologies attractive for our hardware partners. And any addition can be used as the main system by our developers for internal dogfooding purposes. Support switching between additions/releases schedules at any time, and exercise code paths for containerized apps and immutable base systems to improve KDE's software deployment. But you'll still have the options to run, even though the stable one is there, you're still going to have the options to run a testing edition and an enthusiast edition. The testing being the most bleeding edge, then enthusiast be there in between stable and testing. So, if their stable isn't bleeding enough for you, they got these for you too. So maybe this distro will be enough to get me back into the KDE ecosystem and get me to try an immutable system, which I've been saying I should try for a long time.
So there's an interesting note here on one of these pages that really makes me go, On the community.kde.org, KDE_Linux page, KDE Linux, codenamed Project Banana, is a work in progress name of a KDE-owned general-purpose Linux distribution proposed at Academy 2024. Not to be confused with KDE Neon. Mm-hmm. It does not say that it's replacing KDE Neon.
Nope, it is a separate project.
Well, obviously it's separate, but the question is, does KDE Neon still have a life? Does it still have a purpose? Is it going to continue?
Is it going to be like the prototype where it just sits on the shelf after you finish it and move on?
Well, I wouldn't say Neon's really much of a prototype, since it's going to, in many ways, be lagging behind where KDE Linux is.
Yeah, although you figure KDE Linux may lag behind on the actual KDE releases if Neon is more bleeding edge. I don't know. It's an interesting direction to go.
Yeah, I mean,
when Neon was originally founded, they wanted super stable because they wanted to make sure that all the issues they were running into were coming from KDE and not from the underlying operating system. So that's why originally they wound up on LTSs and not on other newer releases, even running like the .10 releases or anything like that. Only LTS. But later on, we'll talk about how LTSs are going to start having newer kernels show up.
Oh, good. That will actually be very, very, very handy.
This may not be a direct comparison, but when Ubuntu Core comes out, there's still going to be the regular Ubuntu, isn't there? Maybe not. Maybe eventually no. Or when Fedora's Silverblue came out, the regular Fedora came around or stuck around. So, those are major distributions with more than just an aim to show off the latest and greatest of KDE. So, maybe they'll stick around for a bit and then they'll realize why maintain both. We could just put it all right here on this beautiful Arch-based system.
Yeah, so I'll tell you another another KDE system that you might want to think about is Fedora Workstation. So, do you have that? Do you have that one, Jeff?
I do not.
Okay, so let's talk about it. I want to plug it here. There was so in Fedora 40, I think it's for 42. There's all sorts of change proposals that the people that work on Fedora put together, and so they'll write proposals, and then the steering committee will vote on it. That's how Fedora makes decisions. And the KDE Special Interest Group wrote a proposal and said, "Hey, why don't we switch Fedora Workstation, which is like the flagship ISO, the flagship spin? It's not really even a spin. It's the flagship version of Fedora for on the desktop." The KDE SIG folks were like, why don't we just ship it with KDE instead of GNOME? And, of course, this is not something that they very seriously expected to get approved. But what ended up happening is the VESCO, the steering committee, said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a flagship workstation KDE version. So Fedora KDE is no longer going to be a spin. It is going to be a flagship with equal status to the GNOME version. I'll get a link to this later. It's very interesting. And so then the question that I have, that I really am curious, is RHEL going to follow suit? Is RHEL going to become a KDE or somewhat KDE distro as opposed to its current GNOME life? Does
that mean the spin just goes away, or do they keep trying to?
I think the spin becomes it becomes the workstation. Yeah.
Well, I want to say I think it was CentOS for a long time was running KDE.
It may have. I'm not sure.
At least the ones I've used in enterprise environments, they were using KDE. But I was actually going. Oh, go ahead.
The CentOS I used in enterprise environments had no GUI at all, but
that's true for mine too.
Well, I was just going to say, though, if somebody's listening and they want to try a newer version of KDE, I personally would recommend Fedora then.
Yeah.
If that's...
For now. Until KDE Linux comes out.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, I would say it's going to depend how much of an enthusiast you are, and we'll see how stable it is, because it's work to get an Arch stable.
Not really.
I don't know.
Especially if you're talking an immutable system like this with the AB.
So I'm guessing that the KDE guys are going to do the work to get it stable, and then that's going to ship. Their stable snapshot is going to ship as the immutable.
Yeah, I think it's gonna. I mean, it's one of their main goals. I think it's gonna work well. I don't think they're gonna have the problems that base Arch users have. And yeah, there's problems getting Arch installed the first time, everything working smooth. But normally, my experience, once you have it working, it mostly works. Sometimes something's
mostly works.
Once you get it going, it works.
That's kind of like
let the hilarity ensue.
Exactly. That kind of sounds like if it's not crashing, it's actually doing pretty good.
No, well. What I mean is it works great, except for sometimes the user can do something that breaks something. I never had that experience much, but
much.
But there are other Arch-based, like Garuda, that I don't think has much of a problem. Manjaro's one, but I hear lots of people giving Manjaro.
I learn more when I break things myself.
That's true. I've told people for a long time now that the reason I understand how computers work is because I've broken and fixed my own so many times.
But with with KDE Linux being an immutable Arch, you're not going to be able to learn much. Probably you're going to learn. Well, roll it back.
All right, let's talk about the kernel. I think Jeff has a story about 6.13. And then we need to dive for a minute into all the things in 6.12. So, Jeff, take it away and tell us what's up.
I've got a couple stories here. Eventually. This first one, though, I wanted to focus on something specific. And in the upcoming Linux 6.13 kernel, there's going to be expanded atomic write support to the ext4 and XFS file system. Now, I know a lot of you out there are probably cheering at that, and there's probably a lot more who are thinking, what is atomic write support? Well, atomic write support is not new, as we already have it in block devices, like with NVMe and SCSI support. For those that don't know, SCSI, SCSI. This came in kernel 6.11. Christian Bronner explains this very well in his pull request, although I will be adding to his quote just to explain a few things better for those of us who don't have intimate knowledge of the file systems. He says, an atomic write is a write issued with torn write protection. This means for a power failure or any kind of hardware failure, all or none of the data from the write will be stored, never a mix of old and new data. And this is me adding in, basically he's saying, if something happens while you're trying to write, you will either get all the old data that was there before the write, so the new data won't be shown as written, or you will get all the new data that was going to be written with none of the old. So when you have a mix of the new and the old data, that's a torn write. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you tore a page out of one book and tore it out of another, and now you've got a little bit of a mess. So, you might not have what you wanted because maybe it was you lost the new data, but the existing data will be valid and make sense, and it won't be just randomized garbage. Okay, he continues on. This work is already supported for block devices. If a block device is opened with O_direct and the block device supports atomic write, then fmode_can_atomic_write is added to the file of the opened block device. This pull request contains the work to expand atomic write file support to file systems, specifically ext4 and XFS. Currently, only support for writing exactly one file system block atomically is added. Since it is now possible to have file systems block size greater than page size for XFS, it's possible to write 4K or larger blocks automatically on an x86. So I did want to add in here, the XFS file system actually started working on support for this atomic write when they released the block atomic writes in Linux 6.11. So at that same time when they did that, the XFS file system was adding patches already so they could support atomic writes as well. Sometimes when you start adding, you don't have enough. It can take a couple releases before you're actually able to fully implement it. So now we're seeing the culmination of that work. Take a look at the article linked in the show notes for all the details. It contains links to the story, links to when the block devices had atomic writes added, and it even has the official pull request if you want to see all the nitty-gritty details of everything. So I think very cool.
Yeah, this is related to what they call copy on write, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I believe so, because it is for that power failure or something goes catastrophically wrong and you don't have much time at all to finish what you're doing.
Funny that you bring that up.
It either writes it or it doesn't.
I'll be talking a little bit about a copy and write later on in the show.
Oh, well, there we go.
Would you say, Ken?
I said it either writes it or it doesn't when it's powered down.
Yeah, that's the idea.
Yep.
Not halfway through.
Yeah, halfway through is bad.
And a lot of times actually block devices have a little bit of safety built into them where that they can continue to run for maybe a second, or it's not very long, it's very short time, but maybe just to finish kind of what they're doing and try to get that last bit of data written before everything turns to garbage.
Well, for Flash, that's actually pretty important, and that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to corrupt SD cards on things like Raspberry Pis, because for a Flash device to write to a sector, a block, whatever they call that, that smallest unit of data, it first has to delete the whole thing and then rewrite the whole thing. And so if you kill the power after it's deleted and before it's rewritten, you just lose the whole block. And that's not good. It's no bueno. So things like NVMe drives, they've got enough capacitance in them. They've got capacitors to be able to finish whatever that process is, so that you don't lose data every time the power gets interrupted.
A page would be the smallest
unit. There you go. That's the term. That's the one I was looking for. I knew we had. I know a guy that knows the right term there.
Yeah, that actually used to write tester code to test
that exact thing. Yes.
Yes.
You wrote code? I always thought you said you're not a coder.
I did write a little. I never said I never wrote code. I'm just not particularly excellent at it.
What development platform do you use?
I was using KDE and that CentOS running KDE.
May I
That's why I
make
just
a
ran it in a
suggestion
shell.
on
I
one?
didn't. Do what?
Was it Bash scripting or Python?
I was writing some in Python. This was back when Python 2 was cool and 3 hadn't really come out yet. And the other thing was there was some custom machine code, I guess, kind of a almost like an assembly type language that I was writing in.
Probably wasn't cross-platform then.
No, it was. Well, actually, it kind of was. It could run on both Linux and Solaris machines.
Oh, interesting.
We could run it on some Spark stuff.
Fun. All right, let's take a minute here and talk about the kernel. And I'm going to do this because nobody else is going to talk about 6.12, so I'm going to. And there's some stuff in 6.12, some really interesting stuff. So we are recording this on Saturday, November the 16th. For those of you that get us on the download, of course, it will be later than this. So on the 17th, the expectation is that Linux 6.12 is going to release. So for many of you, by the time you hear this, it is already out. And 6.12 it's got about 3 or 4 different things that I'm really pretty excited for. So first off, 6.12 finally has preempt RT real-time Linux built into it, officially there. And that has been coming for something like a decade now, a very long time. It also has the Schedule EXT, the external scheduler, which this one, I don't think there's a whole lot using it yet, but I imagine that you're going to see use of it in things like the various gaming modes. Like you could do this in Steam. I think Feral has one of these where it's another program that you run and it goes and it puts your machine into like a gaming mode where it currently it'll use the performance scheduler and turn all your turn your course the core power usage up, things like that. I would not be surprised to see some of those use the external scheduler. And then we also have the QR code baked into the Linux BSOD. Yes, Linux will now have a blue screen of death of its own, and it'll have QR codes. And then one other thing that really, really interests me here is we've got the initial Raspberry Pi 5 support. Honestly, I thought this had already landed. But apparently it is just now getting there, and I've not dug real deep into what all is supported on the Pi 5. But apparently it is initial support for the BCM 2712, which that's the SoC that runs the Pi 5. And it is preliminary, so don't go looking for full video card, video device acceleration or any of that stuff. But it's there. It's enough to boot it, so that is cool. And a little slower than I expected, but I am sure that the Raspberry Pi 5 or the Raspberry Pi Foundation and their developers are directly involved with this. So, as always, good for them. So 6.12 is out. That's why we're starting to talk about 6.13. And yeah, it's another kernel development cycle just about in the can.
Yeah, when they release 12, then they'll start the pull cycle for 13. So, yes. And they actually have next branches that you can kind of predict what's going to get pulled. Yeah, or have a request for pull. So.
Yes, and so you can watch. That's what Michael Larrable at Phoronix does. He watches all of those -next branches. So all like a maintainer will have that branch, and so you can just look in there and go, "Oh, this is the stuff that he's going to send in the pull request to Torvalds," and get a pretty good idea of what's going to land. So 6.12 is exciting. 6.13 obviously is going to be exciting too. There's some stuff that I am waiting and looking forward to that hopefully is going to land in some of the 6.12 dot releases, bug fixes. So all kinds of fun stuff. Ken, you want to talk about .NET?
No, but let's go ahead and do it.
I'm kind of surprised. Ken is not usually the Microsoft guy, and I don't think of him as the .NET guy either.
Well, it sounded like a good article to cover.
Okay.
Because Bobby Borisov wrote it, of course. And he's wrote about the launch of the latest and most advanced version of the .NET free and open source development platform. We are, of course, talking about Microsoft .NET 9. Now, .NET 9 has thousands of improvements, including substantial updates across the entire .NET stack, bringing increased productivity, unmatched performance, intelligent features, and enhanced security, according to Bobby. The server garbage collector has been adopted to better meet applications' memory requirements, especially in high core environments, while reducing memory usage by up to 93% in certain benchmarks. According to developers, they've seen major gains in the Tech Empower benchmark, showcasing a significant 15% jump in requests per second performance. These enhancements make .NET 9 ideal for developers building high throughput, resource-efficient applications. Alongside .NET 9 is .NET Aspire 9, a powerful set of tools, templates, and packages designed for creating production-ready applications easily. It has new APIs and features like the ability to keep containers alive between debugging sessions and integrations for platforms like OpenAI and Milvus. Bobby notes .NET 9 continues to evolve full-stack web development with ASP.NET Core and Blazor. The .NET multi-platform app user interface, or I believe it's pronounced MAUI, developers can now easily build apps across mobile and desktop from a single code. According to Bobby, this release of .NET 9 brings increased performance and deeper integration with Android, iOS, macOS, and Windows platform features.
Oh, come on. Some of those others deserve a cough, too.
Yeah.
I suspect the same is true for Linux. I recommend reading Bobby's article to see what he says about a certain buzzword I've avoided using.
Thank you. So I've got a buddy that is a big .NET fan, and when you talk about .NET, you've got to remember this is not the decade ago .NET where it was terrible and you had to run mono to make it work and everything was broken, and on Linux at least, although on Windows too it was broken a lot of the times. No, .NET is now open source, fully cross-platform, runs natively on Linux and on Fedora. So like, when you think about the different Linux distros and how strict they are about packaging software, we're free versus open source and patent encumbered and all of that, Fedora is one of the strictest. I checked this just the other day. Fedora is one of the strictest. And so like there's a lot of things Fedora won't do because of patent reasons or other, because of their rules. You can go to Fedora and you can pull up DNF and you can install the .NET platform. It's just there. It is right in the Fedora repos. So you can install it on RHEL. You can install it on Ubuntu. It's there. It works. .NET is pretty. I've never programmed in it, but I've been told that it's not too bad these days. So it's a win.
I've on the Windows side, I've done a bit of .NET development using Visual Studio back in the day. I do really wish an IDE like Visual Studio would be available for Linux for it, and I'd get back into it.
Rob,
what?
You realize that Visual Studio runs on Linux?
No, that's Visual Studio Code.
Oh, okay. Does VS Code not do .NET?
Well, like Visual Studio, you actually have like the graphical, like you have you put your canvas on there, and then you drag a button over to it, and you and then you click the button, and it takes you to the code, and you type in there what you want that button to do.
Oh.
It was easy to make things. Like, you didn't have to know what you're doing, which is why a lot of bad code was done.
It was easier than
which
Visual
is why Rob
Basic.
liked it. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
So
it works great till it breaks.
There's Gambus. Gambus is actually a very underappreciated platform in Linux. It's been around for years. I think they're on version 3 or 4 now. But and that's very much like it. If you want to see what it's like, try out the Gambus interface, and it's very similar. Except for that's a basic like language only.
Yeah, so that sort of interface is kind of like what people would call a low code interface, right? It makes it easy without having to write a whole lot of source code to just click and drag and do things.
I mean, the GUI part of it, you don't have to code. But when you actually code, you still have to type all the code out. It starts it for you. Like, you click the button, and it says, on button click, parentheses, close parentheses, and then you type in there what you want to do. And it has a lot of autocomplete, or IntelliSense, I believe is what they started calling it eventually.
Rob,
it handles the coding
Control
for
V
the
is
graphics.
not typing code.
So Visual Studio handles the graphics while you end up putting in the code that handles the logic behind
Mostly.
what the application does.
You don't have to manually code out the GUI part.
So it looks like there are extensions for VS Code that can give you some of that same functionality if you really, really want it.
Well, I'd be interested in checking it out then.
Yeah.
How good was it at doing that? Because now I've only got experience with like one program, but I knew somebody when I was writing tester code, they had a front end and it was for Python, and I believe it was TK is what they were using, and they had an automated system like that, and it just generated so many lines of code. I mean, it was just
I don't know. You can't even
crazy.
I don't know how you could even see what the GUI code was in there. It just never showed it anywhere. So it could have been complete trash on what that was, but
That's actually kind of a problem when you can't get into the GUI code to fix things or customize
it's probably
things.
somewhere. I probably could just open like the files that it actually created or something. But it functioned well. I mean, I had a program that I sold for years. Actually, I gave it away for years, and I started selling it.
All right.
Makes me think of Atari Pilot with Turtle Graphics.
we gotta move on. We are running long here. If we don't want a 2-hour episode, we gotta start moving. So, Rob, try to sell someone other than me on some new hardware.
That's what I'm here to do. And now for another edition of something Ken should buy. Not Jonathan. This is for Ken. Even if most of us haven't gone out and purchased a framework laptop yet, besides Jonathan, I think I could say we're all definitely fans of the philosophy, and we are all interested in the future of Risc-V. And this summer we did share an announcement that this was coming, but now it is here. You can now get the Risc-V board under early access for your Framework 13 laptop. So if you remove the value-added services, by default, that is checked. But if you say no, you don't want that, you can get the basic package, just the board, for $199 or select the standard for $299, the Pro for $799, and the Enterprise for $999. Or add, I think it's another $100 if you add the for the top one there. So the Basic and Pro are just the add-on boards, which you would use if you already have the Framework 13, while the Pro and Enterprise includes the entire laptop. So the basic package includes the DC Roma Risc-V board, framework and cooler master case, 2 USB-C expansion cards, and an SD card 64 gigabits. The standard includes everything that the basic has, plus a USB-A expansion card, HDMI expansion card, Wi-Fi module, and Wi-Fi antenna. And on, like I said, the Pro package, that's the same thing as the basic, but it also includes the framework laptop itself. And then the Enterprise is the same as the standard, but includes the laptop, the framework laptop itself. And if you choose the value-add services, the price for that piece of it alone ranges from $99 to $169, depending on the package you get with those services. So first access, like the the value add services, they include first access, get 50% off next generation mass production mainboards available in 2025. Discount code, you can receive a 15% off for any product in the Deep Computing online store. Influence product development, you get a unique opportunity to provide valuable feedback to help shape the future product improvements. A feedback form will be provided upon receiving the product. And then you get a Bravo Monster discount. Receive a 50% discount code for purchasing Bravo products at the Deep Computer online store. So I don't know. They're really pushing that. That's why they have the S check. But I guess I'd probably just select the no and get the hardware I want. So you can get these. You can also get these preloaded with Ubuntu 2404. I know Ken and Jeff will like that. But for Jonathan, we also have Fedora 41 available. Or, I guess Jeff also likes to dabble in both. You can actually get it with both images preloaded. So Fedora, Ubuntu, they must be listeners to the show. They know what you guys like. I'm not in the market for a laptop right now, but this would help. This would be on my top 10 list for sure, probably.
This is dangerously fascinating.
Especially for someone who already has a framework.
Christmas present from Santa.
There you go.
That's only 40 coffees for just the board, the basic board.
Yeah. This is pretty fascinating. I like seeing. I love the fact that Framework is doing this with other companies, that they're sort of teaming up with them and letting other people do cross promotions. I think that's really cool, and I really like what Framework is about. I think they're great. So yeah, this is cool, and it's super fascinating to see Risc-V coming into its own. I'm looking forward to the next iteration of what all of these companies are doing. Particularly the next version of the Vision 5. Let's see what exactly is in there. The J, what is it? The Star 5
JH7.
The Star 5 JH7110. I think that's actually what's in this thing. From Star 5, a little carrier board. Yeah, it's the JH7110. They're not the most performant, right? Like, so it's less than it's less performance than a Raspberry Pi
4,
less than a 5. I don't remember if it's more or less than a 4. I think it trades blows with a 4 is essentially what happens where it's at.
This model is probably where it's finally kind of getting usable at a very low level. It definitely be interesting to see what the next model comes up with.
Yeah, I did some testing on this, and I wrote an article about that particular chip on that board. And I think the conclusion that I came to is that it's not really ready for running as a desktop, but it is ready to it's ready for developers to be able to build the software that will run on a desktop. Right, so it brings Risc-V into the mainstream on the developer side, and then at some point we'll get a faster version of this thing, more cores or whatever it takes, and at that point it will then be usable more as a desktop. It's slower than a Pi 400. It trades blows with a Pi 4. That's essentially what the Phoronix article says.
Yeah, 4 really wasn't useful. You can make it work for your desktop, but you probably don't want to. And 5 is when it really got usable. So hopefully they kind of make the same leaps and bounds. Yeah, I mean,
I would love to see the Vision 5 sort of leapfrog the Pi 5. The Vision 5 2. So the next version of that, the Vision 5 3, maybe whatever they call it. I'd like to see it leapfrog the Pi 5 and be at least trade blows with the Pi 5. That is when it would become really interesting. The other thing to keep in mind is that you're going to have problems finding a browser, particularly a browser that has support for things like DRM, right? So like if you want to be able to watch Netflix, certain things on YouTube, that might not work on the Risc-V platform because that support's just not built out yet.
It's really probably best. I mean, the boards are probably best to have like a specific use case. And then if you have this add-on board for your framework, you plug that in and you do your Risc development for the Risc boards that you're going to have for whatever appliance purpose you have in place.
Yeah, well, so I mean, it's a little bit more than that. So like I said, my take on it is this is good for developers for not just doing appliances, but like for working on the desktop with the view towards the next chip is going to be powerful enough for it to be usable.
Right. I guess with the view that they'll be able to get a browser to work. I mean, that's a very key thing to most desktops these days.
Right. So like you can get Chromium. Okay. So I want to be clear about what I'm saying here. You can get, so just say Fedora 41. They will have Chromium compiling on Risc. It's already there. I think, I'm pretty sure. So you can get Chromium. Chromium is a different experience from Chrome, particularly if you go to do something like go to Netflix, because Netflix requires, I think it's Wildvine DRM, digital rights management.
Yeah. I mean, if you're planning to go to Netflix, it's just going to spin anyway, you know, like the world all saw last night.
So what you're saying is by the time you finish compiling Chromium, the faster machine will be out.
Thankfully, you don't have to compile it yourself. There is a Fedora Risc repo, right? Like it's there. The support is actually pretty good. I really need to grab it and do a Fedora 41 install on this thing and see what it's like. It has been a while since I've had that thing up. So like
Rob,
most of it, you're going to have a good experience. It's going to be around the experience of a Raspberry Pi 4. It's just there are some rough edges because Risc-V is still such a new platform.
But Rob, I think you have made a sell on one thing. I definitely need to get the framework laptop case.
Right, and then you can just keep updating that for a long time.
Yeah, that is definitely the one of the huge selling points. In fact, my dad just the other day was like, "So I really need a laptop. Could you build me one?" Well, there's only one company right now that'll let you do that. But yes, actually.
You know, the beauty of computers years ago was the fact that you could upgrade so many I mean desktops, you know, when that's all there was.
You still can with desktops.
You still can. And that's, you know, often been the beauty of it. And, you know, it's almost amazing that we've gone this far into the laptop world and it's never really quite caught on. I don't know, maybe the OEMs think they learned something they did wrong with the desktops. We're not selling enough desktops because they just upgrade them. We'll change that.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to, let's see, Jeff, you've got Ubuntu 2504. What year is it?
Oh yeah, we're already going forward. So if you take a look at the link in the show notes, you'll find it takes you to the Ubuntu community discourse site. The topic we're on today is the monthly update for Ubuntu 25.04, the coming release in April, which will be codenamed Plucky Puffin. As Keith 512 and I were talking in the ULS Discord, that code name opens up the door for a lot of interesting and cool wallpapers. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that. So Canonical says that they're basically saying that they're going to have these monthly blogs to talk about how the upcoming release is doing and what they're working on and give more details under the hood. So that way you can kind of follow what they're doing development-wise. And, you know, they can give some background on choices they're making, things like that. For example, the blog talks about how they want to have further refinements to their desktop installer. They want to provide additional messaging around the presence of other operating systems, provide out-of-the-box encryption options for dual boot installs, as well as better handling of Windows BitLocker encryption situations. Now, they also talk about accessibility improvements, which Ubuntu has been championing for quite a while. They're really behind accessibility, as in they really back the accessibility. They talk about how they had a third-party audit of their desktop experience and found a wide range of things they can work on to improve, you know, keyboard navigation, screen reader capabilities, high contrast options, things like that. I mean, that's just a few of the things that the third-party auditing found as they could improve on. They do talk about how excited they were to hear how much the community wanted an immutable Ubuntu core desktop during the Ubuntu Summit. So I won't go into detail on that, as we talked about it, I think it was last week, but they're really excited about that. A little more under the hood, they're planning on using GNOME 48. So this is Ubuntu after all. We'll see what version Kubuntu uses for KDE, but they didn't touch on that in this article. Ubuntu is also going to use the Linux kernel 6.14, assuming that kernel development cooperates. But that's what they're planning. Now, they do mention that, Ubuntu 25.04 using the new kernel will also allow 6.14 to be the hardware enablement kernel for Ubuntu 24.04.2 LTS. So there will be a way that you can get a newer kernel into your LTS if you need it. Hardware enablement means just that. You can load a kernel in because that new kernel has support for some hardware that you want to run, fixes bugs for something, things like that. So it will, this aggressiveness, I guess, in having newer kernels in Ubuntu will have trickle-down effects even on their LTS systems. Now, the blog goes on to talk about apps as well, such as the Snap version of Firefox will not connect to smart cards, and they give some command line instructions if somebody wants to test their work, how it's working out right now, so they can, if you want to check the progress, if the issue affects you, but they're working on it to try to fix it. And, so you don't have to manually set some command line parameters. Following the KDE nomenclature, they also say that they're working on paper cuts. For those who don't know, paper cuts are small issues and bugs, which, they're not catastrophic, but they can really be annoying. So they go through a list of various small things that they're trying to improve and polish and refine more. We should look forward to seeing these future updates about once a month, the blog updates, as 25.04 continues to get further along in the development cycle. Now, it should go without saying, but while you can get nightly builds of 25.04 release, it's not even to the alpha stage yet, so don't expect any kind of stability or, it's rock solid, but you're one update away from total catastrophic failure. So this is a toy at the moment. This version is also where they're going to default to the new -03 compiler optimization from the previous -02. So there could be possible issues with that, though they have successfully tested previous versions with the higher optimization level. But, you're adding a different compiler flag. It could, depending on your hardware, the age of what you got, things like that, it could be an issue. So just don't think even the nightly builds are going to be something you want to trust too much. But I will say, I think 25.04 is going to be an exciting release, and I am looking forward to it. Well, the KDE version of it.
I've been looking at what they were touting here, and they talked about the what do they call it? The Ubuntu desktop installer, and this is sort of tickling my memory that there used to be a Windows application that you could run that would install Ubuntu for you. And
I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know that exists anymore, but it was cool.
I tried it once. It was kind of weird.
I don't know as it does exist anymore. I think it handles Windows pretty good now. The one thing is, because they go into better detail in the article, but they talk about, like, if you have BitLocker on, they recommend you turn it off for Windows when you install Linux, like when you're dual booting. But they're trying to work around that so that they can, or maybe work with Windows. They want to not have BitLocker being such an issue during install.
Yeah. So nowadays, when you go to install Ubuntu, you write it to a flash drive, then you reboot the computer and boot off of the flash drive. There used to be an Ubuntu installer that was literally a Windows executable that you would run. And I guess maybe that just doesn't exist anymore. Maybe they discovered that wasn't such a great idea.
It began with a W. I don't
remember either. That's been a long time ago.
And it actually, I think I feel like it installed Linux on actual NTFS or something.
What sounds interesting to me, I don't know if it is going to be proactive or scary, but they're talking about moving some of the additional system services, and they say in quotes, such as Pipewire, into their own snaps to reduce the work needed for others to create their own bespoke sessions.
Yeah, that could be interesting. We'll see.
We'll definitely be living in interesting times when they do that.
Yes. Well, that was sort of one of the things that Pipewire is intended to be able to do, though, right? Is to transparently work with your different containerized programs. So that's sort of in scope for Pipewire. All right, Rob, you were right. I found it. Woobi, WUBI, Woobi. I finally found it. The easiest way to install Linux. And it looks like the last release was 10 years ago. So we're really showing our age on this one. Yep. That's not been around for a while, but it was a cool idea.
Yeah. Last work with those coal-fired computers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. So let's talk about Debian. Debian has a new bookworm point release. What is new in Debian, Ken?
Well, we'll have to ask Marius Nestor about that, since he wrote about the Debian project's latest release. In fact, Debian 12.8 is the seventh point release for the latest Debian GNU Linux 12 bookworm operating system series. Now, according to Marius, Debian 12.3, did anybody hear about that? Was never released due to an issue in the ext4 file system that led to data corruption, so it doesn't count. So we've got .8 being the seventh point release now.
We're off.
And this
great.
This latest release is powered by a newer kernel in the Linux 6.1 LTS series. Now, Debian 12.8 provides those who want to deploy it on new hardware an update to up-to-date installation media where they won't have to download hundreds of updates from the repositories after the installation. This latest release includes 68 bug fixes for miscellaneous packages and 50 security updates, including fixing incorrect handling of some OCSP responses in curl. Debian 12.8 installation images are available for download for, and it's quite a list here, 64-bit, that's the AMD 64, 32-bit, has anybody heard of an i386?
Mm-hmm.
PowerPC 64-bit, Little Endian, the PPC 64EL, and then you've got the IBM System Z, MIPS 64-bit Little Endian, MIPS 32-bit Little Endian, the basic MIPS. Then there's the ARM EL, ARM HF, and ARM 64 hardware architectures that are all going to have images for. Now, Debian 12.8's live images are available for 64-bit systems, pre-installed with, here's quite a list of desktop environments, KDE Plasma 5.27.5, the LTS version, GNOME 43.9, XFCE 4.18, Cinnamon 5.6.8, Mate 1.26.0, LXQT 1.2.0, and LXDE 0.10.1. These are all desktop environments. I'm surprised they didn't have a few more in there. Now, a standard live ISO image is also available for download without a graphical environment. Wonder what you could use that for. Now, Maria's article includes links to download both the installation and live images. Now, if you already have Debian GNU Linux 12 bookworm, just run sudo apt update followed by sudo apt full upgrade. In fact, I did that on mine, and I found it was already up to date on my Chromebook. I also noticed that my Chromebook has Linux kernel 6.6.50. Anybody else got a Debian, even if it's only in a VM?
I have Debian on my Raspberry Pi. It's technically Raspberry Pi OS, but it's based out of Debian. Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was going to say I have run it, but it's been a while. But I'd be more open to it now, where they're including the non-free. You can have the proprietary firmware and drivers now.
Well, if we're going to include things based on Debian, I have some Ubuntu servers. But no, actually, I think I have some other VMs too. I think my Home Assistant's actually Debian.
Are those without a graphical environment?
Obviously, I said servers.
So Raspberry Pi OS is much closer to Debian than something like Ubuntu is. I just recently, you mentioned the ARM, the 3 different ARM platforms, and that really fascinates me because I just did some troubleshooting around this. And ARM-L is actually, it means ARM Little Indian, and that is actually ARM v5. And then ARM HF is actually ARM v7, which is interesting because the Raspberry Pi is actually ARM v6. And then ARM64, of course, is ARM v8. There's a little bit of decoder ring magic needed there to get those lined up properly. So the reason I was troubleshooting this is because we were building our 32-bit ARM binaries, and they weren't working on the Raspberry Pis, the Raspberry Pi, the 1, the 2, and the original Pi 0. And it's like, why isn't this working? And finally come to find out, we were using Debian ARM HF, which is ARM 32-bit, which is ARM v7. So we were trying to run ARM v7 binaries on ARM v6 processors, and that just didn't work. So we eventually got it straightened out by, strangely enough, by taking the Raspberry Pi OS disk image, turning it into a Docker, and then running that Docker on ARM64 hardware. The crazy things we do to make things work.
I was going to say, just also, Ken touched on Little Edian. I always heard it pronounced Edian, but it's little versus big is just the order the bytes are stored. So if you store, smallest byte or bit in the lowest memory address or the highest memory address, determines little versus big.
Yes, and it's Indian, ENDIAN, right? So it's which end it is. But if you're just saying it and you don't know what it is, then yes, it sounds like another word.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was the whole time. I'm like, that's a weird name for a processor.
No, so yeah, it's what's really fun is when you have to write code that converts between the two. I had to look at that a couple of times. That'll hurt your brain.
Or rather, I thought we were talking about some processors that were like from a long time ago, and naming structures were a little looser back then.
No, it's referring to the bit order inside the bytes, as Jeff says.
EN.
Yes, DN. Yes. All right, so let's move on to Debcow. Debcow. What's Debcow?
Well, besides the picture that I have behind me,
Debcow.
I'll just start by saying, before I get into exactly what Debcow is, because it needs a little bit of a backstory. So, with the popularity of copy on write file systems like CFS, XFS, Btrfs, Bcachefs becoming more popular, a lot due to their snapshot capabilities, the extra write can actually slow some things down, like packaged installation. So with Debcow, Debcow is looking to improve that. Debcow is an experimental implementation of deploying Debian packages on copy and write file systems. Debcow adapts DPKG, which is the Debian package manager, to use ref links or reference links rather than doing a full copy of the file each time. And this speeds up the installation process as much as 6 times. So this can make the installation process 6 times faster. Debcow transforms the Debian packages during the download phase, and then a package version of DPKG installs these packages. As a real-world example, comparison, when using DPKG to dist upgrade Ubuntu 24.04 to Ubuntu 24.10, it took this person 90 minutes out of the box. If using DPKG cow or Debcow, the installation time drops by more than half, down to only 44 minutes. So this is a real world example of where time could actually mean something. You know, if you have to update your computer before the show or something, right, Ken? So, and it made me wonder, with Fedora also using Butterfast by default, I kind of wonder if any of DNF5's improvements, the speed improvements that we've seen recently, are anything similar to this, or if not, maybe they could utilize some of these techniques to speed things up even more.
Yeah, ref links are interesting. So a ref link is basically a smart hard link. You could think of it. So rather than making a copy of the bits on the disk, it just makes a note. Hey, there's a copy of this file here. And so long as nothing gets changed, the 2 copies point at the same bits on the disk. And then if you go to change either of them, it's smart enough, it tracks it, and it will then make a copy of it. So it's like copy. One person says it's like copy on write, but for individual files.
So that's still experimental, but
yeah.
Debcow.
There you go. It's cool.
When I think of Debcow, I think of 2 cows, TUCOWS, the old file service.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that.
They still own things today, I think.
Yeah, but the software, the freeware or whatever, shut down about 4 years ago, I think, 3 years ago.
Yeah. Company's still around. They're just not, you just can't download all the cool freeware from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk something else in 6.13. What's Jeff excited about? What?
A lot of stuff. So if things go as expected, as Jonathan said, we should see the release of the 6.12 kernel this weekend, November 17th to be exact, if you're listening to this at a later date. When that happens, as always, the 6.13 kernel pull requests will start filling in, and we'll see what the next kernel is going to look like. If you look at the article linked in the show notes, you'll see that Michael Larabelle has been keeping track of various next branches of the kernel tree. These are the branches which have a high likelihood of being submitted when the official pull request window opens up. Some of the stuff we can look forward to are things like the AMD 3D Vcache optimizer driver is set to be merged. Now, this is not for those that have a 7800 X3D or a 9800 X3D CPU. If you're one of the lucky ones that has one, because they're sold out everywhere. These are for the chips such as the 7900 X3D or the 7950 X3D. Chips that have more than one CCD, and they have one CCD, which has the large 3D Vcache, and the other one has a smaller cache, but it also has the faster cores. So it was kind of a hybrid CPU. It was like a little bit like Intel's, where they have the performance and the efficiency. Well, except this one is some of those, one CCD was kind of for gaming. The other one was for regular productivity. Well, this will allow you to specify whether the user wants the faster cores or you want the larger cache to have priority. So for example, if you're running a game versus doing something more computer intensive, and the because doing a game, we know it loves cache. Games love cache. So it speeds that up. But if you're running like a simulation on something, maybe Blender, well, then it's more important that you have higher core speed. So this will give hints in there. or, set the priority so it can tell what you're doing, where you should route your threads. We have another set of code, which is a mouthful for AMD, going to add heterogeneous CPU design topology patches. So these are somewhat similar to what we just spoke about with the X3D cache chips, but the TPH support allows for hints, and which can be injected to improve latency and lowering the traffic congestion when there are several possible cache locations on the server. Basically, this lets the system store data where it can be optimally used by the core doing the work without cross-cache misses. So this is similar to the X3D, except these are for the server chips. And when you have multiple cores and CCDs, you can have one core accessing data on a cache on another CCD, which is okay, other than it's slower and it adds more traffic in the Infinity Fabric. And you really want to have your loads, your threads with the data you need right next in that cache, right next to the actual CPU core you're going to use. So this is going to help improve the traffic of that. So it'll make it run better. Now, we can't forget Intel, and they're working on the next generation XE3 graphics. We just had the XE2 graphics debut with Lunar Lake, and we're waiting for Battlemage discrete GPUs, which will have the XE2 graphics. The open source Linux engineers at Intel have already started working on enabling XE3, and XE3 shouldn't be too far away, as we should see it next year's Panther Lake platform. Now, Intel does have several patches going into the 6.13 kernel for Panther Lake. That seems to be where they're really putting their energy at right now. Again, because it's probably not too terribly far away, and we can see why. For example, they have support going for Panther Lake, and they have the 5th generation NPU support. NPU stands for Neural Processing Unit. Basically, it's a chip inside the CPU, which is dedicated to API types of functions. They got Intel GPU temperature support's going to finally be coming. They also have the PCIe cooling driver, which is set to be merged in 6.13. Now, this is where some late generation drives, like 5th generation PCIe drives, for example, the, like SSD or NVMe type drives, they can run very hot. And now Intel will be able to control the speed of the PCI link and slow the drive down if it's getting too hot. Basically, it's a safety measure to keep the drive from cooking itself. We also have things leaving the kernel, such as the industrial field bus system, which is basically a way of connecting different systems and components within industrial environments. But it was added 5 years ago. The code isn't being maintained, so it just needs to go. There are various old and no longer maintained staging drivers, which are getting cleared out. We're also expected to lose the Riser FS file system out of the kernel. Now, it'll still be around if you want to run it. You just have to load it in. It won't be part of the kernel. It's not 100% guaranteed that we're going to lose that, but it's high probability. It's expected 6.13 is where it's going to get removed. Now, I won't go into the Riser file system in detail, as we've talked about it in past shows, and it's an entire story in and of itself, but just know it's going to go away. Now, I'm going to stop there, but take a look at the article linked in the show notes, as it has many, many more changes and goes into much more detail, even on the things that I mentioned. So I'm just taking a very high-level skim across the top here. We could probably spend multiple shows just talking about what's coming in 6.13. So have a look and dive into what piques your interest.
Yeah, definitely some interesting stuff in there.
Preempt lazy support?
Cache. I'm interested in that.
Interested in cache. I'm interested in cache.
Well,
there's a show title for you.
Anybody interested in that preempt lazy support?
It sounds like it could be interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I know it's kind of futuristic here, but they've got that, AMD's got that cache prediction for the hybrid chips, the X3D with the more than one CCD.
Is that like an economist?
Yeah.
Cache prediction.
One thing that surprises me that they're doing, I thought it already been done.
Which is that?
the Riser FS file system being removed.
No, they said they've announced that they plan to. This is when it's actually gonna get pulled.
Yeah, they've had several deprecation announcements, but this is where it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, and then Jeff was about to tell us about a future purchase plan of his.
Well, I'm kind of curious if this is also going to apply to like the 9950 and the 9900 X3D chips that are coming out. If they're going to have, now that they have faster cache, because they're putting the cache beneath the cores, are they going to actually have these hybrid type cores? Or are they going to have the 3D V cache on each CCD? So it'll be more like a double 9800 X3D chip.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. It seems like because both CPU manufacturers, and you have this on ARM too, have this idea of, well, let's put different, not the same kind of cores together on a single CPU. And so it seems like there's an opportunity here for the kernel to have like some sort of a unified system to be able to deal with this. This core has better cache, this core has better speed, this core does not support whatever.
And both Intel and AMD have been putting a lot of energy into that of late, of just making that scheduler aware of what the hardware differences are and optimizing so that you, like you said, you get the right workload going to the right hardware.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Intel is really working on their next generation chips because they know that these didn't go over. And there's some mistakes. They're saying there's some microcode that's supposed to speed some things up, but they're really going, we put this out, but the next one is the one that's going to. And I'll be optimistic and say, we've had the current leadership in there driving technology, pushing technology. This is about where we could see some changes really kicking in.
Yep, I'd agree. Intel needs a win. Intel needs a win to keep AMD on their toes, right?
Oh yeah. And I've had both over the years. I've had Intel and AMD chips, and I will tell you, there is no company that is your best friend. So people that are like, I really like this, they're gonna take money out of your wallet just as fast as the other one is. You just have to look at what is the current generation and go with that. And I think I've said on the show before, I almost bought a 14700K when I got my current processor. It was just the schedulers weren't as up to speed at that time for a hybrid type CPU. So I went with the safer symmetrical option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Do we want to talk about LibreOffice, Ken?
Yes, we do.
All right. Take it away.
Well, and Marius Nestor also wrote about the Document Foundation announcing the third maintenance update to the latest LibreOffice 24.8 Office Suite series. So this is going to be LibreOffice 24.8.3, not 4 or 5, 3. And LibreOffice 4.8.3 improves its overall stability and reliability by addressing more of those pesky bugs. I've got a friend who wants to get down.
Speaking of pesky bugs.
That's a little mean, but...
For those that can't see the video right now, we had a cat crawling over Ken trying to get away or get down off of the back of his chair.
After she got up there. But now, LibreOffice 24.8.3 addresses a total of 88 bugs. Details about these bugs are available in the RC1 and RC2 change logs. This release also adds support for the Visio template format. Some people may see that referred to as VSTX. Now, Marius recommends waiting until LibreOffice 24.8.3 point release arrives in your distro's stable repos to update your installations. If you have an older version of LibreOffice, then LibreOffice 24.8.3 is available for download right from the official website as binaries for Deb and RPM-based GNU Linux distributions, as well as a source tarball for system tarball for system integrators and those who like to compile software from sources. Keith 512, I'm thinking of you. The LibreOffice 24.8 Office Suite series will be supported with 7 maintenance updates until June 12th, 2025. The next point release, LibreOffice 24.8.4, is planned for mid-December of this year. Be a nice Christmas present, won't it?
Yeah, fun stuff. Fun stuff. For most of us, it'll just happen, right? You just install your updates, you get it. You don't have to worry about it.
Yes, it is. Though I noticed with my Tumbleweed that I've got installed, it hasn't got it available yet. I'll probably see it within a week.
Yeah, I mean, you figure it takes a minute. They want to actually test it and move it into an unstable sort of repository, and then test it there some more, and then push it out to stable. Just takes time. All right, let's get into some command line tips, guys. Let's talk. We'll let Rob take it first, and you've got something interesting here. We're not quite deleting files. We're doing something else.
So, for those of you who listen to Ken and all his great tips with using alias to make all these great aliases, and maybe you made a mistake or decided now your system's really kind of cluttered up with all these aliases and you don't know what to do. Well, the command you need to know is unalias. This will remove your command, your alias. So, for example, if you look here for those watching, I'm going to type alias just to see what aliases I have there. This is mostly default, but I created this one here called home that's just going to take me to home. So let me get somewhere else. If I type home, you see that alias took me right to the home. Well, maybe you can't see it very well. But what I'm going to do is, that's a really stupid alias. So I'm going to do unalias and just type the alias name, and it's gone. So now if I type alias, you're not going to see home in that list. Now let's say I have a whole bunch of these and I don't want any of these. Let's just type unalias -a, and that's going to remove them all. So if I type alias, I have no aliases left, which a lot of those default aliases I just got rid of may have been nice to have kept. But hey, maybe you just want the default system and you don't want any of those aliases there. So unalias, real simple to use. If you messed up your system with Ken's alias command, just use unalias to get those dirty aliases out of there and get back to a more natural system.
There you go.
Now, is that persistent, or will those aliases come back the next time you open a terminal?
It's for the user, so it should be persistent for that user. Well, unless you have them in like your one of your
.bash.rc
your .bash.rc or something that's created them for you every time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, Jeff, let's add a little spice to our lives.
Yeah, this is for people that really want to fix their computer. So we're going to go hardcore geek this week with this tip, which is ngSpice. Now, this isn't a Linux tip per se. It's a little more of an open source tip for hardware. So it's a SPICE simulator. SPICE stands for Simulation Program with Integrated Circuit Emphasis. And it's kind of a language, I guess, that was derived to simulate circuits. And the initial release was in 1973, so 51 years ago. And it was written in Fortran. Well, ngSpice is a modern version of SPICE, and it's compatible with other SPICE model files. And what can you model? Your circuits can have JFETs, bipolar, and MOS transistors, passive elements like resistors, inductors, capacitors, diodes, transmission lines, and other devices all interconnected in a netlist. So digital circuits can be simulated as well, and with the combination of parts I mentioned, so you can have mixed signal circuits. I won't go into detail on how you write these net lists and generate these files, but there's a little bit of a learning curve to do this. But, there might be a way to do it graphically, and you'll have to stay tuned next week for the second part of this. So take a look at the link in the show notes as it goes to the NG Spice website, and it has a ton of information along with frequently asked questions. It's got screenshots of the graphical plots it can produce, a ton of information, how it's what all compiles in the package, or it comprises of the package. It's a lot. And so for those of you electronics people, or maybe you also follow Jonathan on Hackaday, this would be a good circuit simulator. And like I said, stay tuned next week when we have part 2, putting a graphical front end on NG Spice. So happy simulating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one actually sounds really interesting. I've got a couple of projects I meant to pull that out for. Sounds like fun.
Yeah, for those of you that have used the old P-Spice, that's we're going to kind of follow in those footsteps.
Fun. All right, Ken, tell me something I don't know about Pipewire. Ken is muted, or else Ken tried to run his command and killed his Pipewire daemon.
No, I haven't run it. In fact, I'm playing it safe by taking screenshots for this. But this week's command line tip is pw-link. It lists, creates, and destroys links between Pipewire ports. And as you see with the screen I've got up, I've got the screenshot of running it with the -- help. It gives you the syntax and options you can use, such as the generic is just pw-link followed by the options. You've got the -- version, which I actually ran underneath, where it shows that I'm running it on libpipewire 1.2.6. That's on my Tumbleweed, not on the Ubuntu Studio that I'm currently on. It's another reason why I took screenshots. And you've also got, now when you go to list, you can list out the output, input, links. And if you do with any of that, you can add a -I to put an ID in front of them. And I found the -- verbose or -v a very good option when you're listing, because it gives you verbose port properties. In other words, more information about the different ports. Now, pw-link does connect or create links between the different ports. So I found that using -io was helpful in listing both my input and my output ports. Here you'll see that it's got MIDI, input and output, or through ports. I've also got HDMI stereo. That's going to my Sanyo TV for the audio going to it. And then you've got the analog stereo. All of those are ALSA outputs, by the way. So you can see I'm using ALSA to talk to everything. But the analog has stereo outputs as well as stereo inputs. The basic format for any of those is going to be ALSA _, for example, input.pci-. I don't know if the numbering is going to be the same every time, but it's 0000-0F_00.6, then followed by .analog-stereo, for example, capture FL for front left. And those of y'all listening, I'm showing that I've got outputs for HDMI, analog stereo, and then inputs from my webcam for the audio, for the mic on it. And one that I noticed when I was in Tumbleweed was a blues _MIDI.server, both in and out, that I'm looking forward to playing with after the show. And with the third screenshot, it's showing where I've listed all the links that I had set up. I used a VLC Media Player to play an audio file, and it shows that it's linked into the ALSA output going to my Sanyo TV, the HDMI stereo playback. And then it also shows the link coming from the VLC into that. So it shows it both methods. The fourth screenshot is where I used the Pipewire pw-link space -lm for list and monitor. That way it's continuously listing out what's happening as you're doing it. For those of y'all listening, it's giving me a list where on the far left it either has a plus or a minus. The plus means it's creating a connection. One of those is for a kwin_wayland:output1. And that's actually for passing video. So we are starting to see video appear in Pipewire. Mm-hmm. And in fact, this particular link was actually connected and disconnected when I was moving my mouse cursor between the display and up to the panel to highlight to select for another screen. As I was doing the outputs, I was selecting spectacles to capture each of the screens. So that was interesting. Now, the fifth screenshot that I took is a continuation of that. At the bottom of it, though, you'll see where I had to do a Control-C to stop the monitoring. You'll also see where I used PW-Link to connect VLC's front left output to my computer's line out to my handset, selecting to send audio only to the headset's left speaker. So there I was sitting with audio coming out of into my left ear, while the right channel was coming over the TV. So that's some interesting things that you can do with it. And definitely play with it. As I said, there's some stuff I want to play with still with PW-Link. And the next one I'm going to demonstrate may show how you can connect between those snap devices and flat packs if you have to.
All right, interesting stuff. I've got a command line tip. It's really technical, and it's for GitHub. It is for doing something very specific in GitHub. But if you need it, you really need it. So this is to go through and find your unavailable runners. So in GitHub, you have GitHub, the idea of runners, where you do essentially continuous integration. And so if you're hosting your own runners, one of the things that you can run into is these runners sort of disappear, but they will stick around in the GitHub backend. And I had a situation with one of my projects where I had like 5,000 of those hanging around, and I couldn't add any new runners because we had a script that's lost its mind and, continued adding runners when it shouldn't have. And so I went looking for, how do you delete these? And this is what I came up with. And so it is, it uses the GitHub API, and then it does some piping of that through things like xargs and then back into the GitHub API. And it'll just chew through all of those runners that are offline and delete them and get rid of them. And it'll do about 2,500 or 5,000 at a time. And then GitHub will send you back a message that says, you're using the GitHub API too rapidly. Please slow down. So you have to wait for about 5 minutes and kick it off again. But this really saved my bacon this week. And so I'm putting it here so that I can find it again in the future. And so that anybody else that needs it, you know where it's at.
Jonathan just does these tips for himself. It has nothing to do with you guys.
I mean, it's more than once. It's more than once. And I've gone, man, how do I do this? And gone back to our little spreadsheet to look it up. It's kind of like Googling on how to do something and finding your own Hackaday article from years ago. Like, oh, yeah, I did write about that. It still works.
That spreadsheet definitely comes in handy, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it's really nice.
I can't lie and say I've had a few of those. I've done something and then went, oh, that would be a good tip.
Yep. Make a note of it.
And then found out you already gave it as a tip?
Sometimes.
Usually I find out you already did as a tip.
Well, sometimes it's good to revisit because there's sometimes we have them as tips, but somebody did a group of tips and there was like 6 or 8 programs all at once. And let's dig into this one a little more. And
or it's one of those where the tip was real brief or real specific, and there's other things that you can do with the command.
Yep.
So you going to come
Oh, yeah.
back and expand on my alias tip?
If there's
After a few shows.
options available to use with it, maybe.
Cover the one written in Rust.
Yeah, I'm sure there eventually will be. All right, so let's see. Do you guys have anything you want to plug? I know Ken does, but we're going to start with Rob because that's the way we do it. Rob, what do you want to plug?
All right. So first, I want to thank one of the fans out there. I won't say his full name. Just go by John. He's never said one way or the other, but I don't want to give his whole name if he doesn't want to be. Because as you guys all know, I've been really interested in getting a new ARM device. Well, he sent me one right here. The new ARM device I got. Check this out. New ARM. Beautiful, isn't that? Woo! So my new ARM device.
For those not on the video, he held up part of a mannequin arm from the elbow to the hand.
Yep. So thank you for the great ARM device. Otherwise, for other people who want to connect with me out in the interwebs, first, the easiest way is go to my website, robertpcampbell.com. And once you're there, you can easily find links to my LinkedIn, which I'm somewhat active on occasionally. Twitter, which I'm not so much active on. Mastodon, that's my most active place. And this little cup of coffee here is not a social place on the interwebs. That is a place where instead of donating ARM devices, you can just donate. It's a site to donate coffees. Really, you're just donating $5. So donate one coffee, $5, two coffees, $10. That's a place where you can contribute back to me for all my hard work I do for you.
Yep. All right, Ken.
Well, wanted to make sure I was unmuted first, but I want to share an article that Thomas, I'm going to pronounce it Claiborne, wrote for the Register about what Firefox has accomplished now that it's 20 years old. I've got the link in the show notes. And after you read it, tell me if you think Firefox is still relevant.
Interesting. All right. Anything from Jeff?
I guess you can find me at Mastodon, Jeff_Massie. You can also find me on LinkedIn. You can always go to Rob and we're connected and you can find me in there, but I'm Jeff Massie at LinkedIn. And a little bit of news here. So I've got more poetry, but they're not all haikus. So we're going to deviate a little bit, but we're still going to have a lot more poetry corner at the end. So for example, this one right here. There once was an ancient PC, still needed because legacy. When the floppy drive broke, it started to smoke. What a pain in the butt for IT. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
That's better than your old haikus. I like that. I like rhyming.
If I were the IT maintaining it, I wouldn't like it.
It happens.
And I was gonna say the thing is, there's IT people listening to this going, "Oh, I remember the time that such and such machine broke," and so they can relate.
Yes. All right. So I do have one thing that I want to plug, and that is that you can get Half-Life 2 for free. Ooh. So this is the 20th anniversary of Half-Life 2, and you can get it for free if you don't have it already. You may already have it. It may already be in your library. If it's not, you can go out and grab it. One of the great games, has held up very well. And the reason you might really, really want to go ahead and grab it is that here in a few weeks, there is Half-Life 2 RTX coming out. They're doing a ray tracing refresh of Half-Life 2, which is going to be really interesting to see. And so it's a free DLC. It's what they're calling it, free DLC for everyone that has Half-Life 2 already. And right now you can get it for 100% off. And then if you want to go and get the other Half-Life things, they're also all on sale. So if you don't have Half-Life Alyx yet, it's 66% off. So go grab at least Half-Life 2 in your Steam account and then get ready for some ray tracing goodness here in a few weeks when that finally comes out.
I bet you can pick up Half-Life 1 for almost probably nothing.
It is
couple bucks.
The original Half-Life is currently on sale for 99 cents. But you
99 cents more than Half-Life 2.
That's true. But you might actually be more interested in Black Mesa. And I don't know if that's on sale. It is on sale. So Black Mesa it started out as a fan remake of Half-Life 2, and then Valve became aware of it. And whereas Nintendo would have sent them a cease and desist letter, Valve says, hey, this is really cool. Why don't we call it official? Buy Valve stuff, not Nintendo stuff. So anyway, Black Mesa is the official remake of the original Half-Life on the Half-Life 2 engine. It's 75% off too. It's only $4.99.
So be like Valve.
Be like Valve, not like Nintendo. Yep.
So where do I find a Valve controller?
Unfortunately, those are only available secondhand. I've got mine somewhere around here. I don't actually use it that often, but I do have it. I really like that controller. It is my go-to controller.
There's a lot of other controllers you can use with Valve.
True. Yeah. Most any
Even
of them
Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer a mouse and keyboard, but
yes. I do too.
Yes, it is true. For almost everything. There's some things that the controller is really good for, but most everything the mouse and keyboard is great. All right, that is it. We've covered everything. We've got the command line tips. Don't forget to scan the QR code if you're not part of the club. See, here's the thing about this. If people are not part of the club, they can't get the video. And if they are part of the club, why would they scan the QR code? Because they already have it. So if you're watching live and you're not part of the club, scan the QR code. If you are listening because you don't have the video, then come join the club. Support TWiT. Get to be part of Club TWiT. All kinds of advantages. And it's only about the price of a cup of coffee per month. We appreciate everybody being here, those that watch us live and caught us on the download, and we will see you next week on the Untitled Linux Show.